Hi, and welcome to episode. I got to start counting the numbers again. What if I forget? It's episode 50, squidgery, jiggery, pokery tonight of Shelf Analysis. Not that is, the numbers become less important and it starts to seem all a bit insane by the time we get to 55, 56, 57. Welcome to the second last episode of Shelf Analysis for 2020. Next week's episode is going to be our final one of the year. The week following that is the festival, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And then we're back second week in January 2021 with somebody I've booked already. I already have somebody booked for autumn of next year. Don't, but it's somebody worth waiting for. So I'm going to talk to them then. Before I get to tonight's guest, I have a bunch of things I want to tell you about. I'm going to start with this just announced in the book club today. There we go. This one here. Which is our books of the month for December 2020. Two for the month, both of them picked because A, I love them, and B, I think they would make incredible gift books for the person in your life who might be slightly awkward. I'm going to start with Patrick Frayne. This is Okay, Let's Do Your Stupid Idea. It is his debut collection of non-fiction essays. You might know Patrick from his work with the Irish Times and from his incredible columns, which are the funniest things on the internet. This is his book of essays about him, about growing up, about being part of quite a famous band at the time, about working in healthcare, and about all of the things that have happened to him in his life. They're warm and they're wonderful and they're really funny and they're wry. And I don't know a single person who's read them who hasn't absolutely adored them. So you're bound to know someone in your life who's going to want a bit of that. That is Patrick Frayne's Okay, Let's Do Your Stupid Idea. The second book for December 2020 is going to be the monolithic, and I mean that in the best possible way, Art of the Glimpse. This is 760 odd pages of the finest Irish short story writing ever. The Art of the Glimpse is edited by the wonderful Sinead Gleeson. It's 100 stories. It includes everybody you think it will, from the 18th century all the way up, bang, to the present day. It has the James Joyce in it. It has a bit of Samuel Beckett in it, some Brendan Behan in it, all the way up to the Kevin Barrys and Colin Barrett's and Sally Rooney's of this world. It also manages to reach out in the best possible way, which is wonderful and something that's not really been done with anthologies before, into new Irish communities and into the traveling community as well when it comes to writers. It is incredibly inclusive. It's different to any other collection of Irish short stories you're going to come across. The best part is it's relatively cheap and it's 700 and odd pages long. So you've got somebody in your life who's really awkward and you know that they love reading, but you just have no idea what they like to read. And you're thinking, do they like reading stories? Art of the Glimpse would be the way to go. They are going to be our two collections for the December books of the month in the Ricochet Book Club. Now, I'm going to get rid of that. In theory, I should come back on the screen again in a minute, but that's the nature of technology. There you go. I'm going to give you something else as well, a couple of other things I want to talk to you about. Currently, the Ricochet Book Club Christmas Appeal is up and running. In case you haven't heard about it yet, we are fundraising for 3 charities this year: the DSPCA, the Samaritans Ireland, and the Peter McVerry Trust as well. And we've raised, well, if we raise another about $3,000-ish roughly, we will have raised €100,000 in the last 3 years for charity. This year, let me have a quick look and see how we're doing. As I click that button, €12,164 raised in the last couple of weeks. It's open all the way through until New Year's Eve if you'd like to make a donation. Let me stick this. I did this thing with the text on the screen thing. Look, I know how to press buttons and make things happen and stuff. So there's the donation link. You'll find it on all of my socials as well, but it is bit.ly/Ricochet. Appeal is where you're going to find that. bit.ly/Ricochet Appeal. Did I put something else in here? I may have put something else in. There's the piece that people were raising funds for, of course. There you go. The wonderful Peter McVerry Trust, Samaritans Ireland, and the DSPCA. They're the ones we are raising funds for this year. And you'll be able to make a donation there at bit.ly/Ricochet Appeal. Of course, if you're in the Ricochet Book Club watching this, you'll be able to find all of the details there. If you're watching this on RTE Culture, just check out that below and you'll be able to make a donation any stage between now and the end of the month. They're immensely appreciated. We ask for potentially the cost of a book if you can, and they're all going to 3 wonderful and incredible charities as well. Right, let me press on the button here so I can tell you a little bit about this. One more reminder as well that the Ricochet Book Club Christmas Festival 2020, I mentioned it there, it is happening not next week, but the week after, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th of December. It is a festival Online, run by me, entirely free to you, in which we have 4 events on 4 nights, and all of them are going to be well worth your time. Which one comes up first here? These are all a bit out. There you go, the Monday, that's good. It's going to be our poetry night. That is 3 incredibly wonderful contemporary Irish poets reading their own work and work that they love in 2020 as well. That's happening on the Monday. That's our poetry night. You'll find details of that in the book club. The party finishes it off on the Friday. That includes who have we got for the party? We've got Liz Nugent for the party, and we have Darren Negrifa for the party, and we have Donald Ryan for the party, and we have Colm O'Regan for the party as well. All reading from their own work and talking about their 2020 as well. There is a quiz happening on the Wednesday night of the 16th, hosted by me. There are no winners, no losers, but there will be some spot prizes on the night as well if you fancy taking part. And the Books of the Year panel is on Tuesday, December 15th, and that is with me, Ronan Hession, Sinead Gleeson, and Jan Carson. We're going to be talking about the books of 2020, and that's all happening in that week. I think I'm done. I think I've got almost everything else. There's a couple of things I want to let you know about at the very, very end of the program, and I'll hold off until then. Particularly, there's something following tonight at 9 o'clock that I'm part of as well, and that I think you might want to have a quick look at. One more, I knew there was one more. Don't want to forget it. Dublin Book Festival is running at the moment in association with the Unpost Irish Book Awards and the National Library of Ireland. This is an event that I did for them. It's called Voices, an Open Door Book of Stories. I talked to Carlo Gebler and I talked to Helen Ryan. There'll be readings from Dermot Bulger and Emily Hurricane as well. That is also free, and it's on 3 o'clock Saturday, December 5th coming. Let's get on with it, because I've been talking for 7 minutes already. This is way too much time for me to be talking. My guest tonight is somebody that I've known for a little bit of time, and somebody who I have only the most enormous admiration for. As I said to her earlier, if at this stage somebody told me that she was going to end up on the International Space Station in 3 weeks' time, I'd go, yeah, that sounds about par for the sort of year that she's been having, and 2 years that she's been having. Please, if you can, put your hands together virtually and welcome Sinéad Burke. How are you?
Hello, how are you? Thank you so much for having me. As somebody who has been lurking in your book club for such a long time, it is incredibly surreal, but also a huge honor to be here.
I only found this out today because obviously there's about 34,500 people in the book club. I don't know them all by name. I tend to notice when people I know turn up or get in unless they're let in by somebody else. And today I just posted something about you. You were like, hello, yes, I'm here. I go, what?
Well, I have to admit, was it last week you did a brilliant session about children's books, and Break the Mold was mentioned, but I was sitting watching it and I was like, oh gosh, this is the weirdest thing. Should I say hello? No, okay, I should leave because it looks like I'm anyway. But I think the work that you do in relation to making books accessible and giving people space to talk about their interests in learned or in more colloquial ways is really wonderful. So this is a treat.
I'm also thinking you would not be the first person to pop up in the middle of a discussion about their own book and go, hello, I'm here. Hi. You wouldn't have been the first. You really wouldn't.
Yeah, I just not a place I'm most comfortable in.
Let's start the same way I do with every author who comes on the series, because this started in March at a point where we were in lockdown 1. We are now at the end of lockdown 2, fingers crossed for however long. How has that affected you in 2020, maybe in terms of your work and just personally as well?
I think prior to the beginning of this year, a lot of my work was based in other countries. I'm very fortunate to live at home. I'm actually sitting in my brother's bedroom. He came in a second ago and he said, are you on camera? And I said, yes. I live in Navan in County Meath. And prior to this, I would have spent few nights at home because I would have traveled for work. My work is rooted in advocacy in the design and education spaces. So sometimes in fashion, sometimes in thinking about how we design retail spaces for accessibility, and sometimes in education when I lecture too. There's my
Hello, Sinead's brother. How are you?
He says hi as he takes his guitar from the room. Don't say hello. Goodbye. My opportunity.
The look of horror on your face.
I was like, because I can only imagine he'd be like, "Don't buy Break the Mold. It's not very good," okay. As brothers would do. But I came home in March when the announcement was made, and I had 8 to 12 projects cancelled in 48 hours, and all of a sudden I had time on my hands, which is not something that I am used to. And I wondered if I would work again as somebody who was self-employed and had set up my own business. I really struggled. I had this big hope that by the end of this year, I'd be able to apply for a mortgage and buy a house, which seems so ludicrous, but it was the truth. And all of a sudden that wasn't possible. But I'm really fortunate that actually what the time gave me was opportunity to reassess. That I'm very fortunate that I've got to be the first to do several things. But is that the measure of true change if things only change for me? So really, I've spent the year trying to figure out, how do I make sure that change is systemic and sustainable? And how do I ensure that, yeah, it's not just for a moment, but a movement. I also took up knitting hats. So if you need a hat, Rick, I can make that happen in about 24 hours. One of the things that I've done for myself and my mental health is that every day I go for a walk. For the people who live locally, they can set their clocks by me. I go for a walk at the same time in the same route every single day. And I start my day with fresh air and a conversation with a friend via phone. And it has been the spinal cord of my stability and success over this time. And I also wrote a book called Break the Mold, where, yeah, it began in March and is now on shelves and in libraries.
It is the strange thing. Firstly, I would love a hat, but I have an enormous head, so you would have to make an extra large. It's
I have
just
a whole variety of needles. I can hook you up, Rick. No big deal.
okay. That's fine, because as you can see as well, this head does need a bit of warming when winter comes around. I had wondered about you prior to this conversation as well, because pretty much these days, every time I had seen you prior to this, you're right, it was elsewhere. It was somewhere else in the world. It was, it was working with a magazine somewhere else. It was, it was being dressed by some major fashion designer in some sort of bizarre thing I didn't understand, but I knew it was really important, and I knew it would be really important to you as well. That whole thing about making sure that change was systemic, was that something you'd been thinking about for a while? Had that been rumbling around in the background, and then this was just like the nudge?
Always. I think I had always wanted to make sure that progress wasn't just something that I profited from. And I think I struggled with understanding the mechanisms of actually how to do that. But also in a climate of busyness, which we as Irish people really succeed at, it became another thing on the to-do list. Whereas the pandemic forced everything to rise on that to-do list in a sense. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, I have time, let's map this out. Let's see what is actually possible. And what I've been able to do, I'm really grateful for, is that, my home is probably one of the most accessible places to me. And I've been able to flip between Microsoft Teams and Zoom calls. And I worried that technology would be an inhibitor for vulnerability or intimacy, which is so often the traits that we require, because when we're talking about things like disability rights and disability justice, we're trying to change hearts and minds, which in turn will change policy. And what I've been lucky to learn and understand is that we can still do that. It's not the same as being in person, it's different, but it's still possible to create that catalyst within governments or within companies or within communities to get people to think differently and then take action about it. But yeah, I've been home since March and it's been a respite and a real joy.
Tell me then a little bit about the award-winning, can I use the phrase, congratulations, book. Now, hang back, actually, before you tell me about the book, was that unusual? Because obviously you've had this book out. It is your first. You won an award at the Unpost Irish Book Awards, which normally would involve you being dressed to the nines at a ceremony and making a speech and being on TV. All of that, and I've talked to a couple of authors who were involved in it just for this year. That's all kind of disappeared. Did you feel a little bit bereft?
I'm really grateful that this is the first thing that I have written, because I have nothing to compare it to. So my book is published by Wren and Rook, who are a division of Hachette, who are based in London. I've never met my editors. I've never met my publicist in the UK. I've never met any of the team for my book. We have created the entire book in Google Docs and in Zoom. The process began at the end of March, when I emailed and said, hi, do you think this might be a possibility? And they said, sure. Can it be on shelves by October 15th? And again, because I'd written nothing ever before like this, I was like, yeah, how hard can it be? Turns out really hard.
It happens all the time. That's how books are made, right?
I mean, short timeline, fine. Manuscript in 3 weeks. It's about me. What's the big deal? Turns out it's actually not really about me. And I wrote the first draft almost like a biography and thought, they're going to think this is excellent. They are just going to think, you know what? I'm not sure if Pulitzer Prizes are given to children's books based in nonfiction, but if so, this would get it. Turns out that wasn't their response. They said, this is a book. This is not it. And I'd really love to say that I took criticism easy. And I didn't. I really struggled. And around April time, I just felt like, do you know what? This is a pandemic. This is not the time to try something new. This is not for me. And I'm lucky that I'm surrounded by parents and siblings and friends who said, keep going, try it again. And I wrote the book at 4 a.m. every morning when the house was quiet and just tried to piece away at it. But I'm grateful that my only experience is this one that is slightly odd, because I don't feel a sense of breath, but joy and surprise and curiosity about the whole thing.
Tell us about the book then itself, and so what did you end up creating?
Break the Mold is a toolkit for children, maybe even parents and adults, to learn that they are enough as they are, to learn that we shouldn't encourage the next generation, and even me and you, to change who we are in order to fit in. We should instead give ourselves the tools and the understanding that we actually have the potential and the power to change the world to fit us. And I use moments from my life, whether that's encountering limb lengthening surgery, being a teacher, giving a TED talk, or being on the cover of Vogue, to utilize them as a case study to explore what's possible. And I'm so grateful to be able to work with a wonderful illustrator like Natalie Byrne. And we were so deliberate in, even in this cover, in being really specific about just the wealth of diversity that exists. You'll see me illustrated on the very top right-hand corner in the red shirt and skirt and boots. I don't own boots like that, but I wish I did. We made sure that we were trying to be reflective of different races, religions, different types of disabilities, visible and invisible, aging, cochlear implants, and really just trying to reflect the children that exist in Ireland and in the world, because I was that child who went to the bookcase in the classroom and wanted nothing more but to see somebody like me in the cover and see a story like mine as a protagonist. And that never happened. And even as a teacher, I wanted to do that. And it didn't exist. Or if it did exist, it was written by somebody who didn't look like me. And I wanted to be able to change that. And I was so nervous. I mean, we sent the book to print end of July, August. I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't touch it again. I got my hands on it a week before publishing. And it's probably the most nerve-wracking thing I've ever done, because I didn't know if my lived experience as a little person, which seems so unique, would actually have any resemblance to what a child is currently going through. I thought it might, but I wasn't confident that it would. And to see people say, not that I see myself in you, but there's a section in the book at the end that talks about privilege. But instead of privilege, it uses the language of advantage. It gives children language and a script to think about scenarios like, what about if you're in the yard and one of your friends points to a boy in the yard and says, he's gay? What do you say? There's a comfort and a need to say nothing because it's easier. But if you say nothing, maybe you're given a sense that you agree with them. Why don't you say, maybe he is gay? It's okay to be gay, but it's not okay to be cruel and unkind. And sometimes we just don't know what to say in those moments. So I hope that Break the Mold is a guide to give people a confidence in who they are and what they can achieve. And yeah, it's been such a joy to write it now, not then, but now. And it's probably the proudest I am of anything I've ever created. I think it's a manifesto of all of the things I believe in.
In retrospect, it's a joy. At the time, less so. Now,
at the time, a horror. Currently, now that it's award-winning, a joy.
Yeah, I got a couple of things just before we move on. Kathy Shelley says, I am stuck on a hat pattern and I need advice. You did bring it out into the world. There it is.
I can knit one type of hat in one pattern, which I can make available via Twitter later today. You're welcome.
Fantastic. Gay Pitcher says, I bought Sinead's book for my 24-year-old daughter. Let me get that right. Pauline got it for a 21-year-old as well. So there's a whole world, obviously, of adults who are having this book bought for them as well. Nuala says, hi, Sinead. I know you love fashion and making it more accessible. I loved the Vogue shoot in the black dress, by the way. Who's your favorite designer? Is this like asking you to pick a
child?
Yeah.
I like designers from kind of different eras. So I do some work with Gucci to try to help them think about accessibility. So I'm an admirer of their work and also their positioning in terms of thinking about equality really purposefully. I love Dior when Christian Dior himself was at the helm and thinking about the new look, which was a silhouette figure that looked like this. I think what Miuccia Prada does is really spectacular. I love designers who think about technology and fashion like Iris van Herpen. I think what Pierre Moss and what Kirby at Pure Moss is doing there, and thinking about how do we make social good and fashion collaborative really interesting. And I think what Telfar is doing in making a bag that is $200 as luxury and as needed by the market as a Birkin that is, well, enormous amounts of money, really interesting. I like designers that are doing things to affect social change in a positive way. So not just creating clothes, but doing that business with a purpose.
Do you find now from the conversations that you're obviously having with fashion houses and designers, do you find that the doors are a little bit more open than, let's for instance say, they would have been initially when you started becoming a presence and an advocate?
I can't say that I am the person who did all of this. I think I'm one of those voices in that room. And I think there has been some change. I think we are seeing greater visibility of disabled people, particularly physically and visibly disabled people, in campaigns. I think that's brilliant. We need more of it. But I also don't think that that can be our definition of success. I don't think we can allow the fashion system to say, great, we have a disabled model, brilliant. Aren't you delighted or thrilled? I think we also need to think about how are we hiring disabled people as accountants, as lawyers, as marketeers within the organization as a whole, and also as designers. But I also think our approach needs to be much more considered. We can't just design capsule collections, so specific collections just for disabled people, because in our attempt to be inclusive, that's actually being othering. Because we're saying, well, you don't get access to the whole market. We're going to give you this piece. And you're going to be really grateful because we've thought of you. So instead, the work that I'm doing is trying to get brands to think about, okay, well, what's needed to be inclusive of disabled people? Okay, zips at the back of a dress, not accessible. Zips as a fixture, not accessible at all. Why don't we move to magnets? Why don't we move to Velcro? And actually understanding that that's going to have value for everybody. Because if it's going to be easier to get dressed, that's going to make everybody's day like disability and accessibility to be at the heart of a broader solution, but that doesn't happen overnight. And I get impatient with the rate of change, but fingers crossed, we'll keep pushing.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, in theory, you're here to talk about books, which we actually get to. You know, we may as well start now because we're 25 minutes in already. Tell me about the books that you've chosen. For people who are watching for the first time, the criteria is there is no criteria. You're not given any suggestions as to era or as to when they come from or as to what they are. So where are you going to start?
Okay, I brought a whole selection. My mother said something recently that when you buy your own house, that there's going to be an echo in this house because you will take so many things with you, and the majority of them are books. I occupy all of the bookcases in my home. I also take up an entire shed with books.
Seems fair.
Yeah, I use books to challenge the blinkers of my lived experience and to dissolve my biases. They don't always work, but I try. I am a big reader of nonfiction, so my selection of books today are all nonfiction.
Okay.
The first book that I wanted to show was Disability Visibility by Alice Wong, which is an excellent collection of essays and stories from the 21st century of disabled people around the world. What I think is really interesting is that it's divided into sections that talk about, I'm just going to get to the right page, being, becoming, doing, connecting. Which I think when non-disabled people think about disability and stories about disability, they don't think about them through those realms, but think about, okay, maybe this person is going to explicate their accessibility needs. But giving disabled people space to either talk about their identities or to talk about the world shaped by their identities. Alice is a really incredible disability activist of the September issue of British Vogue this year. She was on the cover. She has also got like the presidential seal of approval from Barack Obama and is just such a thoughtful writer. She also has a podcast called Disability Visibility and does everything that she can to create space for disability activists, particularly through an intersectional lens. So there's some amazing writing from Eugene Grant, from Jemison Hill, and just Essie Smith talks about the beauty of spaces created for and by disabled people. And if you don't know anything about disability, this is a book that will challenge your perceptions. And it's a book that you will grow with. If you know lots of things about disability, this will give you some writers and some artists that you've never heard of before. And yeah, I just think it is really brilliant.
And remind us the title of that again.
Disability Visibility, she says.
By Alice Wong. That's no. You got it roughly spot on, as spot on as any other author has.
So touch and go there. I should know where the camera is.
No.
Pandemic.
It's the lefty righty thing. No. We've all been there. Okay, what have you got next?
So this is a book that I wanted to talk about. This is Susan Sontag on photography. I keep books and note cards and things that remind me of the people and places that I've met. I have boxes that I call the archive, though they're not necessarily an archive, but they're the things that mean so much to me. And often I try to buy books in specific places that have a value to me personally. So last summer, I got to spend the month of August in the Cultural Centre Irlandais in Paris, learning French. Je parle un peu de français, mais c'est ça, only a little bit.
And je parle un peu de français aussi.
Ah, parfait. We can do this in French. No, please don't.
No, let's go no further. No,
that's the end. And it's the first time that I've lived away from home, and I got to experience, for that amount of time, I got to experience 4 weeks in Paris. And I remember walking to Shakespeare & Co., the magnificent bookshop, which isn't too far from where I was staying, and just spending hours looking at the shelves. And I picked up this book, Susan Sontag on photography, and also in Paris went to Susan Sontag's graveside. I love this book, but I also find it really challenging as me, as a little person. It talks about the power of photography, which speaks to me because it is often my everyday experience that I will just be walking down the street and somebody will point, stare, laugh, call me names, but often they will also take photographs of me or videos of me without my consent and without my permission because they think it will go viral on the internet or would be humorous. So actually, Susan Sontag's notes about photography being something that we create a record of, the idea that it is beautiful and aesthetic is really fabulous. But there are about 6 mentions of the word midget in this book within the first 3 chapters. The book is not that old, and it talks about how photography should be something that is used for beauty. And why would you photograph a midget when a midget's not beautiful? And I raise that because this is an author of such importance. Someone whose voice I really admire, and the power of understanding the evolvement of language and what's the responsibility we have to, I don't know, speak to the voices that we're speaking about, maybe in not so kind terms. So I love the book, but I also have questions about the book, which won't surprise you, Rick, seeing as you know me so well.
I think sometimes that's a relatively rare phenomenon in that somebody could potentially go into the first maybe 2 chapters of a book like that. And if they found something like that rightly made them feel uncomfortable, that they would put the book aside and go, that's it, I'm done with you from here. But it's not obviously not something that happened to you. And instead, you're happy to say, I have problems with this, but.
Yeah, but my also follow-up question is, at what point am I able to email the publisher and say, when you're reprinting this, could you include an asterisk to say that this word is harmful? Thanks very much.
I think if you don't ask, you don't get is always my thought when it comes to that.
Let today be the impetus for sending that email.
You are now an award-winning author, and that's a good starting point.
I could include that in my signature.
Yeah. And a picture of you just holding your awards, just like that,
Amazing. Do you want me to go to the next one? I'm conscious that I'm flying through these.
You fire ahead. You go for it. Tell us what's coming up next.
Sure. What's coming up next is Angela Davis's Women, Race and Class. I got to meet Angela Davis, was it last year or the year before? I love language. For me, there are 2 things that give me agency, and they are language and fashion. Because fashion, when you look at me, I'm today wearing a cream cashmere jumper with long sleeves, and that will tell you something about me. Who knows, you may keep that to yourself. But it gives me a power over what it is that I look like. But also language. Because I'm a little person, people made assumptions over what I could or couldn't do, but also my age, when I was younger. And if I use the word ameliorate correctly in a sentence, people are like, oh, she's not 6. But now, as an accessibility advocate, I have to be really conscious that the tools that I used in my youth to dismay people about my age create an inaccessibility in a more modern era. So how can we find a balance between the beauty of language and accessibility? Angela Davis is somebody who I find creates such clarity of thought about such complex things. My first time to read this was actually on a flight to the US. And I was traveling on my own, one of the first times, and books in many ways kept me company whilst I traveled. I remember being on the plane and talking to a member of cabin crew. And she said, what are you reading? And I said, Angela Davis's Women, Race and Class. And she said, wow, I was actually named after Angela Davis. And she wrote me this note that I still keep in this book from the flight that I took. I flew United at the time.
Oh, that's amazing.
And what I love about this book in particular is that it brings together the intersectionalities in thinking about women, race, and class. And as a disability advocate, I'm always very conscious that whilst I may experience marginalization and othering in some spaces, I'm a white, straight, cisgendered, born working class, moved into middle class woman. And being able to ensure that it's not my voice that's always being the one facilitating and instigating conversations. It's as, if not more important, that you find spaces for other people. So Angela Davis is so often the voice in my head in thinking about making space for others.
I also love that you're the sort of person who uses things from where you are as a bookmark, because I do that. I go back to books, I find flight tickets, I find theatre tickets, I find stuff that just happened to be there at the time, and it connects that book to the point at which you were reading it.
Absolutely. And all of the books in my kind of personal collection are from either particular places and spaces that I've been or got to travel to, or they come recommended from people I admire and trust. And it gives me such a sense of belonging when I look at it. Does that make sense? Like, I think anybody looking at my bookshelves would not understand the details and the meaning that it has to me, but it's so deeply personal, often in a way that is kind of betrayed by the title or the subject, if that makes sense.
I'm always one of those people that if somebody comes into my house and doesn't look at my bookshelves, I immediately go, why would you not be interested in someone else's bookshelves? It's the first thing I look at when I go into someone's house. I'm always slightly disappointed.
And what do you want a person to say about you having looked at your bookshelves?
Oh, I don't care if they just go in and have a nose around and just, if they say nothing afterwards, I'm perfectly happy with that. Just showing an interest is the only thing that's important for me. And I you know what? I read a book called Goodbye Things. It's a Japanese minimalism book. His name is Susuku. No, I'm going to get his name wrong. And I read it once and he's Japanese, which is going to make me seem awful. But it's called Goodbye Things. And I got into Japanese minimalism for a little while, not quite the Marie Kondo version of it, but his idea was that, for those people who had books on bookshelves, you only really held them there so you could show off to people as to books that you had read or the sort of things that you were interested in. And that ultimately, he was in Tokyo and he said, I don't want to pay half of my rent as rent for my books to have space to be in. So that was quite an extreme thing for him. I don't care if people think anything about me when they had a look at the bookshelves. Nobody has ever commented about any of the books on this shelf here behind me in 50 odd episodes of this series. I'm okay with that.
Now is your time to take a screenshot and to offer feedback.
And just in case, if anybody's interested in having a conversation about, no, actually, don't do that. I should never do this because there are piles right here that that's ugly. Next book, Sinead, where are we?
Stop being distracting.
Yeah.
Next book is In the Wake. I'm terrible at camera angles. On Blackness and Being by Christina Sharp. This book was recommended to me by one of my dearest friends, who do you know people in the world who you love how they think? Not necessarily the ideas, but how they just see the world in perspective. And my friend Kimberly Drew goes by @MuseumMammy on Instagram and on Twitter. Kimberly, along with Jenna Wortham from the New York Times, have just created a brand new book which came out yesterday called Black Futures. And Kimberly used to be at the Met Museum in New York in thinking about how we curate different types of voices. And this book by Christina just talks about maybe I can briefly even read something.
Please do.
I wasn't there when my sister died. I was in Chicago at the Cultural Studies Association meeting, and I was finishing the paper that was my first attempt at the work that became this book. My brother Christopher called on that Wednesday in May and asked if I was busy. I told him that I was finishing the paper I would give on Friday. He asked me to call him back when I was done. When 2 hours passed and I still hadn't called, he called me. He said that he'd wanted to wait, but that our brother Stephen and sister Annette had urged him to call me back. They told him I would be upset if he waited. Our eldest sister, Ida Marie, was dead, Christopher told me. There were very few other details. She lived alone, she was late to work, no more than 10 minutes late, but she was always so prompt that 10 minutes with no call, text, or email alarmed her employers that they called the police and convinced them to go to her apartment. They found her there. I put the phone down. I called my partner and 2 friends. I texted one of my fellow presenters to tell him that I wouldn't be on the panel and why. I texted another friend, a former student who is now a professor at DePaul University, and he said that he was coming to get me. He told me that I shouldn't be alone. I put down the phone and fell asleep. That was May 2013, and I had no idea then that 2 more members of my family would also die within the next 2 months. This would be the second time in my life when 3 immediate family members died in close succession. Now, I realize with that excerpt that it might sound dark and morbid, but it's so rare that I come across writing that feels so immersive, personal, but doesn't feel grotesque in its explanation that it's exploitative. It just feels like these are all of the visceral details that you immediately must know in order to have an empathy and an understanding for my situation. I gift them to you and will take them away, but they are yours, not to critique or to judge, but to bear witness to the story. So, yes, this is Christina Sharp. Oh, I more or less did that one correct.
That was perfect. And sometimes you're right. Those kinds of stories and that kind of information given to you by whoever that may be, it's rare enough to find, but it can be compelling when you do find it.
Yeah, I bought that book I went to see with Kimberly a Basquiat exhibition in New York around November time last year, and I remember the day viscerally, ridiculously, because I had just had lunch with Belinda McKeown in New York and then ran straight to the museum to see Kimberly Drew and bought that book on the exit to remind me of that place and space. And yeah, those are some of the books that mean the most for me for lots of different reasons, but I use books to challenge myself. And I always sit with a book and a notebook and a fountain pen. And I am that person who is continuously writing new words down as a lexicon for myself, and creating, kind of a membrane of all of the things that I learned from reading.
You're that person I wish I could be. I looked back the other day at the diary I started at the beginning of the work diary at the beginning of 2020. And I was one of those people who the first couple of books I read in 2020, I was taking notes on just things that I found interesting, just sentences sometimes. It lasted for about 3 weeks. And now I didn't have the stick with itness. I'm going to attempt it again in 2021. What else have we got first? Where else are we going?
Book-wise, we have another one that I believe you have an image of.
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yes. So due to sometimes the weight of books, I find them difficult to carry. So I also have a Kindle, and I read this book, Thick, and other essays by Dr. Tressie McMillan Cotton, and gosh, it's just so extraordinary and incredible. Tressie, if you don't follow her on Twitter, which I really would recommend that you do, has such a sharp analysis of the world around us, but also positions it within a context of race and gender and feminism and academia in a way that is just not something I would ever think of. You know, when you see a perspective and you're like, that makes complete logical sense. Why is that person not running the country or the world? And this series of essays talks about the challenges of being a Black woman in America, the challenges of working in academia, but also is solution focused in thinking about how do we make these situations better. But again, is wonderful immersive writing that I really would recommend. And Tressie also has a podcast with Roxane Gay, which is, as you might imagine, particularly excellent.
Fantastic. And that's called Thick and Other Essays. Okay. Do you have any more physical ones? Are we close to the end? I never really ask how many people have.
We are close to the end. Those are the ones that I took out of the shed because it looked like I was robbing my own bookcase as I was coming in with them. So those are the majority of the ones that I have.
Then maybe just before we finish, I want to ask you a couple of things. What's happening now? Where is 2021 bringing you? Those things that you can tell me about, obviously.
Sure. So I've set up a company called Tilting the Lens, which I hope is an aggregator for this notion of systemic change that we were talking about earlier. How do we think about building curriculums, creating scholarships and job opportunities for disabled people, and how do we help companies and organizations who feel so overwhelmed that they don't know what to do about disability or how to include disabled people, that it's both a starting point, but also a way to think about it creatively. So one of the projects that I'm working on is in thinking about how do we redesign coffee shops to be accessible, and not just in a way that ticks boxes, but we're doing things like including wooden floors so that deaf people can feel vibration on the texture of the floor and understand who's standing around them and feel safe. Providing different types of menus. We're ensuring that we're looking across the coffee shop, looking from different perspectives, that different people can see at different times and looking at the pain points. Thinking about how do we hire disabled people proactively, whether that is on the job application, asking if anybody has any accessibility accommodations, providing them in the interview, or just allowing greater flexibility for working from home, even when many of us may return to the office. I hope to write some more. I hope
that was a question from Suzanne Kelly. She says, my 11-year-old wants to know if you're going to keep writing.
I would really love to, but I don't know. Is it like a musician who's like, oh, second album, fear? I don't like how do you write a second book?
You just keep going, I think, is the wisdom. I think allegedly everybody gets second album syndrome, and you just plow on through it, is the perceived wisdom from authors who've spoken on this series.
Well, my brother who came in earlier, when he got word that, we may be talking about a second book, and he was like, oh, but haven't you shared all your stories? Like, do you have anything left to teach people? And I was like, oh, you know what? That really helps my imposter syndrome. Thank you so much. Love to be related to you.
Your family are always the best at that, though, aren't they? They're just spot on.
Spot on. No, my family are the best people in the world. They champion me, but quite rightly, critique and challenge me too.
And just before we finish up, I do want to mention this, primarily because of my absolute disgust at you being interviewed by. Let me see if I can make this bigger. Hang on. Let me see what that. There it is. That's you being interviewed by Colin Farrell.
Oh, this way.
That way. I'm trying to. It's hang on. Can I do that? Because that just that's make me bigger. No one wants to see me bigger. That's awful. No. Yeah. See though, if you point downwards, there you go. That's it. Quite. Colin Farrell. Was I not good enough? Did you just feel the need to just?
Well, you didn't answer my call, Rick.
No, that's fine. Tell me, what's this event about?
Pardon?
What's this event about? Tell me.
This event is an event for families, and it's an event for children. And what we are trying to do is have a conversation about disability and difference. Colin has his own personal connection to disability as a parent, and it's a shared conversation between, I suppose, this tangible understanding of what it is to feel different, both as a person yourself and as somebody who's trying to build a world that's safe for their child to grow up in. It's wonderful. Colin is based in LA, I'm based in Ireland, and through the magic of technology, we're going to be able to make this event happen. And it is absolutely ludicrous and completely hilarious that it is taking place. But with the wonder of Fame Productions and with my publishers, Brandon Brooke and Hachette, this is going to be happening on Friday at 5:30 p.m. And there are tickets still available if you would like to join us. And some of the tickets come with a copy of the book, should you wish. But it is going to be accessible, so there will be closed captioning available, and there will also be British Sign Language interpretation on screen too, if that is a service that you need or require. But yeah, it's a good week.
And in terms of if anybody wants to find details of that, just look up your social media. They'll find links to it there. They'll find it on your Twitter and that kind of thing there. Okay. This has been a joy, but I knew it would be. Thanks a million for taking the time out to talk to us tonight, because I know literally when we were doing our setup tonight, you were in the middle of another meeting with people on the far side of the world where you went, this is good, it works, doesn't it? It's fine. Okay, I'll talk to you in 5 minutes, because you're having one of those days, and I get that.
Well, tomorrow is the International Day for Persons with Disabilities. So what's really wonderful is that this week there are lots of conversations happening in many organizations and companies about disability, which is really great, and I feel very fortunate to be part of them. I do have a slight reluctance that there is a hive of activity this week, and we don't talk about disability again until Disability Employment Awareness Month or until this moment. So how do we make the energy around this moment something that lasts all year, and a realization that disabled people exist all year? So I am very grateful. Rick, you have always been so very kind and supportive to me. I think we did a podcast together.
Oh, I don't know how long ago that is. Let's not think how long ago that was.
It was quite some time ago. Like the
dinosaurs about 5 years.
The world, but like close.
I think it was 5 years ago, because you were still at that stage planning that, you know, your life was just going to be being a teacher, despite the fact that you were doing all these other things. It was like, no, but I'm a teacher at heart. I think it was 5 years ago. I think, and we did it somewhere in Trinity. We did it in one of the libraries, or one of the auditoriums in Trinity. Yeah,
I think we did. I think I was still in. No, was I still in college? I maybe was lecturing. It was, yeah. But I am so grateful for your support of me and of the book. I can't thank you enough.
Go out of that. Thanks a million for coming on to talk to me tonight. I think you need to rest, probably, because you've had one of those days. And
I just got my brother into his room. That's clearly the next step.
because, you know, family relations and all that. Sinead Burke, it's been so lovely. It's been so lovely talking to you. And thanks so many for taking the time to come on Shelf Analysis. Cheers. Thanks, Sinead.
Bye.
Bye. That is that for tonight's episode. Next week, this time, do I have a button to press? I do have a button to press. Don't worry, I have other things to talk to you about, so don't go anywhere. It is going to be Keelan Hogan talking to me on Shelf Analysis next week. That is the final episode of 2020, and particularly with a lot of things that are going on in the news at the moment, I think by the time we get to next week, she's going to have a lot of interesting takes on things that are currently in the news. Keelan Hogan is my guest next Wednesday, December 9th at 8 p.m. on the final Shelf Analysis of 2020. Really briefly, and I never do this, but look, this is going to look weird, but let's do it anyway. There's me. Thank you very much to Mark O'Brien. Mark is the head of the Axis Theatre in Ballymun, and he's been doing a series of conversations with people who are generally in and around the arts world of one form or another. Mainly people who are far more important than me, people who are far more famous than I am as well. But yet, very kindly, the other day, he asked me would I come on and have a chat with him for a little while. So it's about 45 minutes to an hour's worth of a conversation between me and him. If you look up the Axis Ballymun YouTube channel, that starts in 15 minutes there at 9 o'clock. You'll be able to watch it at any stage after that as well. Just look up Axis Ballymun and you'll find it on their YouTube channel in there as well. Other than that, the independent review this coming Saturday will have details about the Shelf Analysis next Wednesday night. And that's it, because my brain's gone as well. I think I've talked about everything. I'm fairly sure I've got everything in, and that's pretty much it. It's been lovely having you. Thanks so many for watching tonight. And I'll see you on RTE Gold tomorrow morning, as usual, from 10 a.m. If you're knocking around. If you're listening to RTE Radio 1 tomorrow, of course, myself and Louisa from Raven Books are going to be doing the first of a two-parter on the books of 2020. We're doing fiction tomorrow on Today with Claire Byrne on RTE Radio 1 at about 11:15 tomorrow morning. We'll be doing the non-fiction books of 2020 the week after that. That's it. It's all. I'm done. Goodbye. See you next week. Take it easy.